Well, hello everybody. Happy to be joining you here. This is our final live stream event before we close enrollment for my program, Hungry Love Masterclass. And so this is a cohort that we open for enrollment once or twice a year, and we dive really deep into what affects change, not just on the level of attachment and relationships, but also on the level of spirit and manifestation. So if you haven't had a chance yet, there is a link you can still apply before the end of today. You'll gain access to an introductory training, and we are accepting calls, booking calls. If you want to talk to me directly about it, we are still accepting them up until midnight tonight. So if you're interested in learning more, there should be a link to some information in the caption of this video somewhere. And if there isn't now, there will be once we end the call here today. So with that, I wanted to create an opportunity to pop in and answer some questions that we didn't get to finish the last time I popped on, and also a few more questions that have emerged in my online community since then. The way that I do this is I usually answer a few questions that were submitted in advance, and then I will create places of rest where I can address some questions that are coming up in the live space for those of you that are joining me live. So as you're joining me, I invite you to type your name in the chat. Just let me know who you are and where you're coming from. Would love to give you a little shout out here on the call. And as people are joining us, I will just dive into the first question that popped up. One question here, is it possible? And if so, what is the best way to get a fearful avoidant partner to recognize what they are and how to help them? Okay. So for this question, I'm just going to pull up my notes here. I would like to offer probably five tips on this. So first, I think we probably want to define fearful avoidant attachment, which is also referred to as disorganized attachment. And let's take a look at what are some of the struggles and strengths that they may have. And how we might approach partners like this with a spirit of generosity and from a place of support as opposed to criticism or judgment, so that they can feel increasingly safe with us and therefore increase the sense of harmony in our relationships, right? So first thing is that fearful avoidant attachment, also known as disorganized attachment, is a complex attachment style, and it's usually characterized by a mixture of what appear to be conflicting behaviors and emotions. So individuals that have this attachment style, they usually experience both these kind of intense desires and yearnings for closeness, but at the same time, they're very fearful of rejection or abandonment. And so they want that emotional connection and intimacy, but then they kind of push it away because they don't want to be hurt, right? So closeness, there was never a safe way to be close to someone. There was always a threat surrounding that emotional closeness. So why is that? Because they might have had an abusive caregiving experience in childhood, or there may have been more subtle forms of emotional dismissal and enmeshment going on. And that can lead to a really deep sense of internal conflict and ambivalence regarding trusting ourselves, trusting other people, and trusting that the way we're showing up to relationships is really authentic and true. And so because of that distrust and suspicion, there can be a lot of unpredictable behaviors. They can kind of oscillate between pushing their partners away, but then desperately seeking that person's validation and support. They can struggle with unresolved trauma and find it kind of challenging to maintain a stable relationship because of this fear of both being rejected and taken over, or engulfment, they call it, right? But these folks also have tremendous strengths. And I want to make sure that we are emphasizing that, because it is these strengths that we are going to draw upon to help us reorient our attachment security to what I like to call soul-centered security. And this is reorienting your attachment security to your own eternal spirit, to the essence of your higher self and higher knowing, so that you're not feeling pushed around by your circumstances or even by the attachment styles of your partners. Okay. Sure, it can affect you and it has an influence, but you don't feel so totally ripped off your center. Okay. And so due to the higher levels of conflict, or what I like to call contrast, in the romantic experiences of our spice of lifers, I call fearfully avoidant folks spice of lifers, I consider them to be individuals that have a great calling. With great contrast comes great calling, and a great calling for spiritual expansion. And so, in order to accept this calling, we have to start with a practice of self-compassion and establish supportive, non-romantic relationships, which are less threatening, so that we can support them both in and outside of relationships, whether that is romantic or otherwise, right? They usually need to have a sort of less charged experience in relationship to other before they can take that healthy blueprint and bring it into the more highly charged romantic experience. Okay. And when we can accomplish this, then there's less hypersensitivity to the internal critic. We're not so sensitive to other people's expectations or their approval, right? There's also an increased sense of self-trust and confidence, and we have the ability to relax while we're practicing emotional stability in relationships, right? Just being able to relax. It's a big deal. And so when we can finally accomplish that, then what happens is let's say our struggles can become our strengths. So for example, feeling more hypervigilant becomes charming because it's likely that in childhood, the hypervigilant state made us very aware of what people wanted and needed and how they were feeling, and they didn't even have to say anything, right? And so as we become increasingly secure, that skill, that hypervigilance, becomes something that informs your charm, knowing how to meet people's needs rather effectively, right? Feeling tongue-tied morphs into a wonderful sense of creativity, right? So for folks that are fearfully avoidant or disorganized, words are usually pretty tough because it's kind of hard to put the chaos into words, right? The internal chaos into words. So what happens is we build other skills, other creative nonverbal skills, and learn how to express ourselves in ways that are beautiful, that are breathtaking, and that are outside of the box, right? So instead of being tongue-tied, now we are creative. We express ourselves creatively. Being kind of adversarial and on the defense can evolve into a wonderful sense of advocacy, right? So having often felt like you were at a disadvantage, that can make you a fierce advocate and a defender of the underdog. And when you can step into that role, you're also becoming an integral part of a community, right? Additionally, our cynicism can evolve into just having good savvy, right? So more than other people, I would argue that spice of lifers, people with fearful avoidant attachment, probably have seen and understand the darker side of humanity more than others, which means that they are rarely caught off guard or surprised when things don't go well. And so they can suss out a situation like nobody's business. And that is a really good friend or partner to have by your side, right? So for the rest of this segment, I want to just share, taking all of that into consideration, I want to just share a couple of tips for when you are approaching someone that may have a fearfully avoidant attachment style, or what I consider to be a spice of life attachment style. So the first thing is you really want to release your own agenda for them. Okay, even if it is well-intentioned. So our inquirer here kind of sounds like they have an agenda for them. You want to let go of that, because if you approach any situation with a fearful avoidant partner and you have that underlying agenda for them, even if it's well-intentioned, they are going to experience that as controlling, as bullying, or as unaccepting of who they are as they are right now. Okay. Now, you can be caring and present for them without needing to point out what you think is wrong or what you think they need to improve. Instead, you want to focus on your own experience and the impact that they may be having on you. So you want to express these things without blame. You want to use firm but flexible boundaries. And then you want to let them have what feelings and reactions they will. Really allowing them to feel their feelings gives you permission to feel your feelings too, without needing to be improved upon or experiencing conditions of worth and love, right? Now, if you want some more specific help with this, I do have a video on my YouTube channel. It is called 6 Effective Tips for Communicating with Fearfully Avoidant Partners. I might even have a picture I can share with you here. Yeah, it's this one. So I have this video on my YouTube channel, 6 Effective Tips, Communication with Fearful Partners. It's going to break down a couple of tips step by step, showing you examples of what not to say and some alternative examples of what will land better. Okay, so The next tip is you want to be patient, okay? And don't take things so personally. So you want to recognize that these partners may have conflicting emotions and they struggle with expressing themselves clearly. So if they are sending mixed signals, it's usually not malicious, and they're going to need some time to work on themselves and sort through their own feelings and their own ambivalence before they can truly know how they feel about you. So you might say, well, they're telling me one thing, but they're acting another, or they're acting like they're interested, but then they say they aren't. That's because they have different parts in operation within them. And no one part of them is any more true than the other. The conflict, the ambivalence, the discrepancy you see between their words and their actions is the truth. Okay? So it doesn't mean they don't love you at all, and it doesn't mean that they don't want to be with you at all. It means that they've got both of those things going on inside of them. And so you want to, at that point, you have to ask yourself, like, what is my level of investment here? Okay. Because they've got some work to do. Third, you want to be consistent in your communication and your behavior, because that is what's going to build trust over time, even if they are being inconsistent. Okay. Don't let your behavior be a response to them. No, you are going to be the rock in the storm. Okay. You're not going to get pushed around by the waves or the wind. That's not who you are. You are going to be the rock in the storm. So even if they are being inconsistent, that's not your bag, right? So that includes things like responding promptly to messages, keeping your promises, and being reliable. Now, if you say you're going to do something, do it, whether or not they're going to reward you for it, right? And if you do, then in time, they will start to trust you more, and they will start to experience you as a safe and consistent person. And what happens is that gives them permission to show up more consistently as well. Number 4, acknowledge their agency. Okay. Now, even though they have this ambivalence, even though they have this inner chaos going on, they're actually tremendously capable people. So don't let that fool you, right? And what these partners really need, even if they act like they don't, even if they say they don't, know that they do. Okay. And so these partners, what they really need is for you to support them and not save them. Stop trying to save them. Okay. Instead of saying, let me do this for you, or let me help you, get help, which is kind of what our inquirer is saying, which, if it's unsolicited, that's going to feel disempowering to them, right? So instead of saying those things, you can say something like, oof, that is pretty awful. Let's punch pillows and howl at the moon, right? But how can I be present with you in that experience without trying to move you away from or out of that experience? Because I can take it, right? Because I'm the rock in the storm, right? The last thing I would offer is, when you are communicating with these folks, you want to express appreciation and gratitude for them. So fearfully avoidant individuals, they can sometimes struggle with self-worth and doubt. They doubt whether they are lovable, or they may doubt that they are even deserving of love. And so showing appreciation and gratitude for their presence and their contributions to your life can help build their self-esteem and also strengthen that bond between you. So you can say things like, I really appreciate how understanding and patient you are with me. That means a lot. Or thank you for being here for me, even though I'm going through a hard time. Now, notice when you are expressing gratitude and appreciation, be super zoomed in and specific on what they are doing that you appreciate. I would highly recommend against using big, romantic, fluffy kind of language. Oh, I just love you for being you. You're immediately going to be suspect, because that is a vague statement. It sounds like you're in love with being in love, and you don't really see them for who they are or what they're actually doing. Now, I'm not saying that's true, but if you express yourself that way, they're immediately going to be suspicious of you, and they're not going to believe a thing that comes out of your mouth. So don't be fluffy, okay? Be very specific and notice the little things. Okay. And realize that you can say I love you in 1,000 other ways than actually saying that 4-letter word. And I would recommend, with disorganized or fearfully avoidant individuals, find those other ways and let them be the one to say the 4-letter word first. Okay. And even if they say it, don't take it at face value. Wait for them to act on it. Okay. So I just, in conclusion, just to put some final thoughts to this. Navigating a relationship with someone who's a spice of lifer, or someone that has fearfully avoidant attachment style, it can be challenging, but it can also be really exciting and rewarding. Okay. Because when we can understand these underlying dynamics, it allows us to acknowledge their struggles, but also embrace their strengths and be able to draw attention to their agency and capitalize on those strengths so that they can start to experience more generosity and reciprocity in the relationship and safety. Okay, that's a big one. Because remember, they're on their own journey of growth and healing too, right? And so your job is not to rescue them or fix them or tell them how they need to fix themselves. Your role is to create a safe space so that they get to show up as their most authentic self, right? Because once you start creating that safe space, guess what? Now you get to show up as your most authentic self. Okay. And so on that journey, we want to embrace patience, empathy, and open communication. We want to release our own agenda and focus on our own experiences while expressing our needs and our boundaries, right? Being empathic towards someone doesn't mean that you abandon your boundaries, right? That you give up what you need and want because it's not what they need and want. That's a totally different thing, right? So you want to be, again, consistent, reliable, and trustworthy so that you're building that sense of safety over time. And that includes acknowledging their agency, supporting them without trying to fix them, and showing appreciation and gratitude for their presence in your life, focusing on the things that they have specifically said and done, reminding them that they are valued and they are deserving of your love. Okay. So with that, I hope that helps answer that question a little bit. I'm just going to take a pause and acknowledge the chat box here and see if we have any new messages coming in. Okay, not yet. So I'll move on to our next question. If questions are popping up as I am sharing, of course, I invite you to pop them there in the chat, and I will create places of rest where I can answer those questions. Okay. Why does my boyfriend being friends with his ex trigger the abandonment issues in me? Is it appropriate for him to be friends with an ex when he knows how it makes me feel? It makes me feel like I can't compete with that. Okay. So I understand how challenging it can be when your partner's friendship with an ex can trigger our abandonment issues. And it's really important to remember that your feelings are valid and they're rooted in your own experiences and probably some insecurities, right? But it's really crucial to approach the situation with some open-mindedness and probably some effective communication skills. So first, I want to address the issue of the boyfriend being friends with the ex. So it's important to recognize that maintaining a friendship with an ex doesn't necessarily mean that your partner has unresolved feelings for them or that they value that friendship more than your relationship, right? People can maintain healthy friendships with their exes based on mutual respect and shared history, right? Now, ideally, you want to know that your partner is dating you because there are things that they admire and respect about you as an autonomous person, right? Beyond how you relate to them romantically. And that just doesn't go away because the romantic aspect has ended. Okay. However, what matters here is how it's making you feel, right? So for example, recognizing that it is stimulating an abandonment issue for you is super self-aware, right? And that's a really great first step. And so when it comes to recognizing these abandonment issues, it's important to realize that they are usually rooted in past attachment injuries, and they may not actually be directly related to your current relationship. So in other words, maybe all of the fervor that you feel around the present situation is actually an old wound, injury, inner child self part that believes that you are at capacity now for being able to deal with that abandonment issue in a more spiritually evolved, sophisticated, mature, and expansive way, right? So maybe your focus upon that circumstance is actually more important than the circumstance itself, the content of that experience itself. It's more about where am I focusing now and how is that informing me about my next phase of evolution, right? Evolutionary phase. So your partner's friendship with their ex and the feelings that you have about it, in essence, it's creating an opportunity for you to acknowledge those old wounds and release the fears and, let's say, the energetic constrictions that are probably tied to it, right? And so maybe this is a sign that your relationship is actually quite strong because a part of you perceives it as a safe container in which to allow those things to come up, right? And that's all a part of focusing on our own sense of personal growth, right? So that you can be sure if your discomfort is pointing to a value that affects, on the one hand, the fundamental compatibility of your relationship, right? Or if it's actually stemming from a fear-based place that's not really about your partner at all, and it's really about something else that is that much bigger and deeper. Okay. So I would take some time to explore the root causes of those feelings, whether that's through therapy or self-reflection, support from others, or my Hungry Love Masterclass group coaching program. But because by understanding and addressing those underlying wounds or injuries, then we can start to work towards healing and developing that healthier sense of what I call soul-centered security inside yourself. Okay. And I think it's also important for your partner to understand the impact of their actions on your emotional well-being as well. Doesn't necessarily mean I'm feeling this way, so you must stop what you're doing. But when you let someone know how you feel, that creates an opportunity for them to contribute to your well-being and maybe find a place in between that suits both of your needs. And of course, in that case, open and honest communication is really important. So sharing your feelings with him and expressing your concerns in a non-confrontational way can go a long way, right? And letting him know about your abandonment issues and how and why they're being stimulated. Because in a healthy relationship, ideally both partners are willing and wanting to empathize with each other, to show up for each other, to contribute with a spirit of generosity to each other's well-being, right? And so your partner, whether you're misreading the intention or not, they're going to be able to validate your feelings and work with you to find some compromise that is going to support your emotional security in that relationship. So, maybe that involves setting clearer boundaries with the amount of time he spends with this friend, or finding ways that he can reassure you of his commitment, even though he's still friends with the ex, right? So if you want some more information on that, I actually do have a video on my YouTube channel. I know boundaries is kind of a big topic. We talk about this in my course, Healing Hungry Love, or Hungry Love Masterclass, but sometimes it can be a tough one to grasp. So I think I do have a video on my YouTube channel. Here we go. I got a picture for you. Healthy versus unhealthy boundaries and how to tell the difference. So this video is going to help you. It's going to walk you through 3 important things. And the first is how to recognize when a boundary is being stimulated. We're also going to talk about a case example that's going to show how emotional crowding versus emotional isolation can influence our boundaries in relationships, including the effect of abandonment on how we express our emotions. And I also share 7 questions or journal prompts that will help you clarify your emotional boundaries and sort of do a little mini self-assessment. So I'd encourage you to check out that video on my YouTube channel. So the other thing that I wanted to say about that, sometimes just knowing that you're going to allow for the jealous feelings is okay, right? Like, we don't have to kind of scramble around trying to figure out how to make you stop feeling jealous, okay? Sometimes just allowing that on occasion, you're going to feel jealous in this relationship. And that's okay, right? There may not be a fix for it. And they're just feelings. And you both get to have them. You get to be jealous when he talks to the friend, and he gets to be frustrated or mad at you when you're jealous. And that's just, you just know that intermittently you're going to feel that way in this relationship. Because you both get to have your feelings, whether they're comfortable feelings or uncomfortable feelings. And jealousy, of course, is certainly an uncomfortable one, but it also may not be enough to end the relationship over it. So, just remember that relationships are a balance. Instead of viewing the situation as some kind of competition or someone's got to win in this, focusing on building trust and fostering that open dialogue, and really strengthening your own self-worth in the dynamic, giving time and space for you to address the abandonment issues through your own self-reflection and self-inventory if you need to. And maybe that's through things like therapy, counseling, or coaching, right? But all of that's going to create a nice flexible rubber band in which you get to hold comfortable and uncomfortable feelings. And when you're better adept at doing that, you can make more sovereign choices about if the relationship really is in service of you or not, even though he still talks to his ex and it bugs you on occasion, right? So if you want to learn more about that, I actually do have a video on that topic too. on the efficacy of jealousy. So this is a 12-minute video segment, and we talk about the difference between jealousy and envy. We talk about how to recognize jealousy as a personal growth opportunity. We also talk about how you can recognize jealousy as an opportunity to improve your relationship and how it can deepen your spiritual practices. So I would encourage you to check out that video if this is a question or a topic that you resonate with. Okay. So to me, ultimately, it's really about finding solutions that are going to work for both of you. And you can navigate that by first establishing a sense of trust in the relationship, of course, understanding and mutual support, and being willing to express how you're feeling without necessarily expressing it in such a way that you're giving ultimatums or that there's some kind of black and white scenario going on. There's usually any number of variety of solutions and possibilities. And once you accept that it's okay to have uncomfortable feelings, then those solutions become a lot more tangible and readily available and accessible to you. Okay. So let me know in the chat or in the comments if this topic resonates with you, or if you have ever felt jealous or wondered about someone's relationship with an ex. I would love to know how you are experiencing this content. We do have a question in the chat. My very volatile ex has reached out and disappeared after each time for months. He dumped me. I felt tricked. After over a year, I decided to ignore it the last time. He seemed nostalgic and regretful, but did not take accountability for hurting me. How to assess if he has grown or if it was just in the moment? Well, it seems like you already know. He seemed nostalgic and regretful, but didn't take accountability. So no. Has he grown? Nope. Right? So someone who is more fearfully avoidant, they can break up and come back and go back and go back, because oftentimes when they break up with you, it's not usually a definitive decision. They're usually ambivalent about the breakup, or maybe in the moment they're sure about it, and then 2 days later they're unsure about it, right? So their attachment style is really defined by emotional confusion, ambivalence, feeling like kind of being overwhelmed by emotion and then shutting it down and numbing out. So there's the challenge with the disorganized attachment is learning how to navigate that terrain by creating an emotional vocabulary. And I use I use visuals and metaphors to help my Spice of Life clients start to organize their inner life. And understanding that emotions are just a nuanced quality of energy moving through the body, and your emotions are cluing you into how close or far away you are in proximity to the opinion of your own essence and eternal spirit. And usually that opinion stems from the spiritual curriculum that you have on this earth. So I think really the only question you need to ask yourself is, how this person approached you again over a year did they approach you in such a way that you feel like, oh yeah, damn, man, they have really evolved, and I could definitely see myself giving this a second chance. If you're asking yourself, if you're saying he seemed nostalgic, which is a red flag to me, because that seems like they're operating on some level of fantasy, and he's kind of put you in the box of the one that got away, which is almost always fantasy based and not reality based, right? Regret is nice, but regret sort of is intended to ingratiate us, right? Regret is disarming. So is the regret truthful, or is the regret intended to disarm? And did not take accountability for hurting me. So it doesn't mean that he doesn't regret hurting you, and it doesn't mean that he doesn't know they hurt you, but he's not willing to address it in a direct way, right? And because of that is not taking accountability for it. I mean, it's up to you, but that's not someone that I would want to commit myself to in any significant way, because that's not the vision I have for a long-term relationship. And, that's more time, energy, and effort that I'm willing to waste on something. Now, it's not to say that it's a waste, that he is a waste. That's not what I'm saying. Where he is in his process, unable to take accountability, stuck in fantasy and in nostalgia, right? Stuck in good memories. That's okay. It's part of the process, but it doesn't sound like that's where you're at. And that's why the relationship didn't work. He texted, he still had the good memories of me, and the love I gave him filled his heart, and he carries it still. was not always nice or didn't work out. Yeah, see, he's writing a narrative. He's writing a story, and he's sort of filling up on the story, right? He's getting an infusion from the story that he's writing. It's like you've become a character. I wouldn't give any more time, energy, and attention to it, to be honest with you. I don't normally take a very hard stance on this, but in this case, listen, buddy, I don't need to be a character in your story. That's great. But here I am moving forward, living life in reality. And I'm really loving the miracles that are popping up in my life in this tangible experience that I get to have every day. Supply. So supply is a term. Yeah, I felt like he missed the supply and didn't have anything to offer me. Yes, I mean, I think that is one way that you could phrase that, right? Wanting some validation and to feel infused because he's suffering from a lack of something, like access to his own vital life force energy. And when we escape into fantasy as a defense mechanism, which can be sort of a degree of dissociation, then we can get stuck in those kind of fantastic narratives that just really aren't true anymore, right? So that's a great question. Thank you for sharing that. I had another one here. Okay, this one. What are some ways I can approach perceived emotional vulnerability or conversations about tough topics with an avoidant partner without triggering him to pull back or disappear? Okay, so the first thing I want to say is don't avoid a difficult conversation because you're afraid they're going to pull back or disappear, because if they pull back and disappear, that's the information that you ultimately needed, right? So don't avoid looking at the information you need to know in order to make a good choice about your partner. Okay. Now, I know many avoidant Rolling Stone partners who feel tremendous discomfort when their partner asks to talk about a relationship or to express themselves vulnerably, but they've made the commitment to acknowledge that it's uncomfortable for them, and they're still going to sit there and they're still going to challenge themselves to be present in that conversation. I've known many integritous Rolling Stones and avoidant partners who are there for that, okay? Because they know that ultimately they want intimate connection, and they know that this is on that path to that connection, okay? So if you have a partner, just because you have a partner who's avoidant doesn't mean they're automatically going to disappear. I just want to dispel that myth right now. It does mean it's going to be probably more difficult for them, but it doesn't mean they're going to disappear. Now, if you've got a partner who does disappear, that's important information for you. And if they disappear, don't ignore that information, and don't try to pretzel yourself or strategize yourself out of concertedly looking at that information. Okay. So I just want to preface this by saying that. Now, it can be difficult to feel emotionally close to them, sometimes because they also send mixed signals, or there can be a lack of communication because they may struggle to find the words, or words are not so comfortable for them. Okay. Now, if that is the case, there are some ways that we can approach our avoidant Rolling Stones that can help them sort of come out of their shell, and there are communication strategies that do allow us to express ourselves in such a way that misunderstandings can be circumvented and what we are saying can land better. And I have programs on that as well. But the first tip I would offer, especially if you're speaking to a Rolling Stone, is to focus on the present moment and ask about their thoughts instead of their feelings, because they usually feel safer sharing their ideas, even though we know that your thoughts can betray your feelings. So for example, instead of saying something like, "Ooh, I wish you'd share your feelings so I can help you," you might try saying, "I noticed that you just crossed your arms and looked away. I'd love to know what's on your mind. Maybe I can help." Okay. Secondly, you want to practice listening to understand as opposed to listening to fix the problem. So instead of saying something like, "Hey, talking about it would make you feel better," you might try saying, "I can only imagine what you're going through. What do you suppose your options are?" Okay. So it's instead of narrating them to them, just be present with them, right? Thirdly, you can use empathy instead of sympathy to kind of normalize their experience and also respect their personal autonomy. So instead of saying something like, "Let me help you," which for a Rolling Stone, sometimes it feels like you're questioning their agency, instead you could say something like, "Ooh, that would be tough. I'm here if you need me." And lastly, you want to focus on understanding instead of trying to be understood, because inevitably it will affect the same thing. So instead of saying something like, I'm so frustrated that you don't understand what I'm saying, you might say, I'm feeling frustrated right now, but I want to understand. How can I say this differently so that you can hear me? Right. So those are some tips, so quick tips that I might offer in speaking to our more avoidant Rolling Stones. But again, I just want to add that just because someone's avoidant or Rolling Stone doesn't mean they can't have a hard conversation. It just means that it might take more effort on their part and it might be a little bit more difficult for them. But there are plenty of Rolling Stones that show up to relationships with a spirit of generosity, a knowledge of what their difficulties and struggles are, and a willingness to sit through and challenge themselves in these situations because they know they ultimately want a closer relationship, a deeper sense of intimacy, and they want their partners to feel loved. Okay. So let me know in the comments there or in the chat if any of that resonates with you, and also if you'd be interested in learning more about those topics. Let's see. We have some more comments in the chat. 43 here, and I'm over that feeling. Jealous means insecurity. Touched or tapped, and if continues to play out, then I learn to leave. No backsliding and no time wasted on a relationship that won't work once somebody's true colors are shown. I need to work on finding a way not to find all men deep down. Do not really like girls, and the ones that do want to be one. Men only love girls like a toddler, like binkies. Okay, so there's some wounding there. There's some limiting beliefs that are going on in the unconscious mind. And so some of the work there is probably going to be looking at the narratives you have around all men are objectifying, and also taking a look at what it means, what it means for someone to be to waste time versus not waste time, right? Because we're all going to define that a little bit differently. So so remember, hurt people. So when we see someone who's either grasping for control by objectifying you, which is objectification is a mechanism of control, right? And remember, control is all about grasping for connection. So when we are grasping for control, we feel disconnected. And so we feel helpless. And so we combat the sense of helplessness by reaching for control. And we feel more in control when we can objectify someone, because then that gives them less power over us. Then that means their opinion is less important to us, because then that means they can't hurt us in the same way. So what you've encountered are men that are feeling helpless, and they cope with that by grasping for control. And so the way they express that need for control is by objectifying you or the women in their lives. So oftentimes that stems from a narcissistic mother or parent at some point. But it might help you to realize that adopting these narratives that all men treat women objectively, it's not going to hurt them. It's going to hurt you by carrying that energy, right? So maybe by reframing this, by realizing that, I attracted people into my life that fundamentally felt helpless, and they felt so helpless that their insecurities got expressed through a level of objectification, because that was the only way they thought was safe enough to seek connection, probably spoke to the insecurities that I had, which I expressed through my jealousy. And so there's a thread that was being expressed in both of you, and the content of the relationship sort of became a distraction from really recognizing those underlying dynamics and being able to heal them on the level of the energy body, right? So I might invite you to maybe just chew on those reframes and see if something kind of comes up. Hi, Benjamin. Thank you for joining me. My partner just broke up with me through watching a lot of videos about their attachment style. I see patterns why they might have done it. Do I approach them on that, or is that selfish? So I would stop worrying about whether it's selfish or not, and just ask yourself a few questions about how would this be in service of this interaction, right? So what's my agenda in contacting them? What do I want to get out of this communication? What is the underlying need that I think that communication would serve? What are my fantasies about how they might respond, each and every possibility? And what is my emotional investment in each and every one of those possibilities, right? And then how might I say this in such a way that I am being true to the essence of my being and what it is that I am really feeling versus evaluating them and what I think they are doing and my analysis of what happened because now I've watched a bunch of videos and I think I know, right? So in other words, you've gained a lot of intellectual insight and that's wonderful. So now instead of using the insight to analyze, use the insight to give yourself the opportunity of full presence, so that whether you contact them or not is irrelevant. It's about what do you need to do in order to reside now in your full presence so that you can make what meaning you must in order to evolve into the lesson of this relationship, right? Or evolve into and out of what this relationship offered you and afforded you, right? Selfish or not, that's kind of beside the point. Selfishness comes from when we have a lot of skin in the game of what somebody else says, does, how they respond, so on and so forth. And we start to define our identity and what we're going to do, say, and be and think as a result of their responsiveness or non-responsiveness, right? That's selfish because your sense of self is perpetually tied up in someone else, right? When we are able to detach from that, what I call the validation trap, detach from that need, then we are showing up in our fullest authenticity because you're not relying on them to define you, and you're not strategizing your proximity to them in order to find some sense of identification in that interaction. I hope that helps. Yeah, sometimes, objectification really for anyone is usually about finding a measure of control where we feel somewhat threatened or unsafe. Time is full of experiences and learning is there, so no true time wasted working on it. Thank you for your help and advice. Thank you for sharing. Exactly true. My ex had a narcissistic mother and he's really enmeshed, hence all the ambivalence about being with a woman and in a relationship. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. It sounds like you have a lot of insight there. What are your thoughts about stepping out of expectations and outcomes to be present in the moment and just following the flow? So this is really about, it's probably a more advanced concept, but it's kind of the idea that we become real manifestors when we detach our sense of identity from the outcome. So the way that I've been playing with this lately is, we might have a sense of like, well, once I finally have the partner, then I'll be happy. Or once I finally have the house that I want to buy, I'll be happy. Or once I finally get the job that I want to have, I'll be happy. Or once I finally get the amount of money that I want to have, I'll be happy. And so what happens is we're always creating a gap between where we are and where we want to be. And so by perceiving that future self, we are in essence creating a disconnect from the present moment, right? So I don't want to be here, I want to be there, and so I'm never quite here. And so what happens is we create this gap, and then we embody the identity of not there yet, not there yet, not there yet, not feeling this, not feeling what I want to feel. But on the upside of that, we start becoming increasingly clear on what we do want, right? That gets increasingly clear. And so there becomes this sort of increasing tension that exists within us. I want, but I'm not. And when we do things like invest in self-help and personal development, there's this sort of, it's called through me consciousness, it's called by me consciousness. So by me consciousness is this idea that when we first step into self-help and personal development, we're like, we start to say, I'm not a victim. I'm going to take full responsibility for my health and well-being. I'm going to stop blaming people, and I'm going to be totally in charge, right? I'm going to take full control of my life, and I'm going to make it happen. And so there's a sense of evolving agency in that. And this is an important part of that evolving journey, right? But we can kind of get a little bit, and this is good, because you engage with the varieties of life. You pick up resources, you learn new things, you become increasingly savvy. And there are wonderful things that you grow and evolve into in that by me consciousness, right? And there are wonderful accomplishments that you attain through that efforting. But then it's likely that, but even in the by me consciousness, you're still adopting the consciousness that I'm not there yet. So there's a vibration of lack. There's a vibration of not entirely whole. So what happens is you're going to get about halfway to where it is you want to be through virtue of your own efforting and your own gumption and agency. Get halfway there, and then all of a sudden it's going to turn on you. And you're going to be like, oh, but now I'm anxious about how anxious I am. And why aren't I there yet? And I should have been there by now. And oh no, now I've got all these negative self-thoughts. And now I'm beating myself up for I shouldn't have negative self-thoughts. And this is what I call double troubles. So you're anxious about how anxious you are. And you're depressed about how depressed you are. And you're like, I've done all this work, but nothing's working. I got a little bit farther. I must be backsliding now. And so what happens is you get about this far and then you loop back around. I call this the success-driven heartbreak cycle. You loop back around. And so what's the solution then? It's through me consciousness, right? So it's understanding that you cannot possibly exist in this identity that you want unless you are inhabiting it now, unless you accept yourself as you are. Because, the idea is that once you accept yourself, you don't have to better yourself. The best version will just show up, right? It's already there. It's kind of like a light bulb. It's a bunch of paint has been splashed on it. We're just wiping off the film, and the illumination was always there. It's just now we're creating opportunities for the light to shine through. And so the way that I've been playing with this, making these things embodied is usually the best way to do this. And that is, so I like to sit on a couch. For me, my manifesting intentions are to be more fully at home within myself, to stop thinking about future outcomes. And it's a quality of being really appreciative and satisfied and comfortable and content with what you have, while still experiencing a sense of delight and joy and playfulness and creativity and curiosity by imagining something more. So can you imagine something more without denigrating the now, right? Can you imagine something that you could build that would be fun to erect without diminishing what you've already got? Right. And so most of us, like if I were to tell you to build a sandcastle in the sand, you wouldn't think that, well, because the castle isn't built must mean that I'm not worthy. I'm not good enough. I'm not healed enough. No, you'd just be like, oh yeah, it'd be fun to build a sandcastle. It's an add-on. It's a surplus, right? I'm filled up already. I'm just curious and playing with what it means to be surplus, what it would mean to build more. It's about curiosity. This is what Jung called our highest ego potentials. So I like to sit on a cushioned seat, and I hold a pillow in my arms. And my manifesting intentions, my playful intentions these days are manifesting like a weekend house in northern New York. So I sit on a couch and I hold a pillow in my arms, and I realize that when I have that weekend house in northern New York, I may have an opportunity to sit on a cushioned seat and hold a pillow in my arms. And if I were to close my eyes, would anything be different about me or that experience if I were in a different setting? No. It's still going to feel the same to put my butt on a cushioned seat and hold a pillow in my arms. Am I going to be a fundamentally different person? No. So what's stopping me from just being who I am right now? I don't need the weekend house in northern New York to be something better or new or fancy or different or more evolved or more successful. Not really, because even when I'm there, I'm just going to be the same version of myself. So it's a level of detachment. And so once I can detach from the idea that my outcomes mean something about me, mean something about who I am and what value I have to bring to anything, then what happens is I remove all the resistance to that thing actually occurring in my life. So that's kind of an explanation. These are the things we talk about. Those are the things we talk more about in Hungry Love Masterclass. Okay. So I hope that that's helpful. I've always thought chasing a woman is like chasing a moon on the horizon, enjoying the presence and experiential essence of connection. That's great. Thank you for sharing your experience. Absolutely. I learned that a long time ago, but it took a long time to learn. Yeah. Well, we can know something, but understanding it experientially is a very different thing, right? Yeah, the experiential nature of reality is really important, because a lot of times when we've experienced attachment injuries or other forms of trauma in our lives, we have learned how to think our way around life instead of feeling our way through it. And there's also, and psychological research has also borne this out, that if you have a highly developed third eye and ability to visualize, oftentimes people who have that ability will just visualize the accomplishment of the thing or the acquisition of the thing or what have you, and feel satisfaction, and then they won't take action to pursue, right? Or they won't take action to experience that in an embodied way, right? Because manifestation's not just about sitting back and fantasizing. It's about creating an openness and a receptivity to receiving the intuitive nudges that allow you to take inspired action, because we are spiritual beings having a physical experience, and we are here in part to engage with the material resources we have at our disposal. I mean, it's fun to build sandcastles and knock them down. It's fun to build businesses and sell them or dismantle them. It's fun to learn a new skill and apply it in action and see how you can take a piece of wood or a piece of glass or a piece of anything and make it into something functional. That's fucking fun, right? So how can we line up that sense of joy and a curiosity and creativity and excitement with a sense of surplus and abundance and creativity, instead of chasing a sense of relief for a sense of lack that we fundamentally feel, right? Okay. So with that, we are at the end of our time here together. For the avoidant to become aware and to grow, does it take feeling the loss and the anxious to really walk away? Well, it depends. I mean, I would say fundamentally, just across the board, most people don't change until they experience a catalytic event. For most people, that experience is an experience of loss. Most of us run habitually on automated programs and unconscious conditioning, and we will not change it until something disruptive has happened in our lives, because our brain is processing billions upon billion bits of information. And then when it finds a habitual way of processing that information, it's going to hang on to it until it sees evidence that that habit is counterproductive in a significant way, like a life-changing dysfunctional way. That's why heartbreak tends to be why people find me, because it's a catalytic experience, right? However, the other instance does occur where someone is living a charmed life. Someone has a lot going for them. Someone has accomplished all the success that they want, that they've desired, and then they arrive at a kind of plateau. And there's a level of adrenaline and there's a level of drive that compelled them to this place because they were seeking the things, right? And then they arrived at that place, and it turns out the things didn't change their identity, and the things didn't quell the yearning or the questing feeling, right? And so now you are at a plateau in your life. Everything should be going good. Everything looks great on paper, and yet you're dissatisfied. And so now you start to feel like you're ungrateful, and now, I don't have a right to feel this way, and da. So sometimes it is loss that catalyzes growth, but sometimes it is a plateau. It is the accomplishment of all that you sought that affects that sort of catalytic evolution. Okay. So with that, I'm going to end our call for today. Thank you, everybody, for joining me here. I appreciate your responsiveness. Fantasy is a playful what ifs are great. Sometimes, so that could be like a midlife crisis would be a good example of that for sure. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your attendance, especially to those of you that showed up live. If you're watching this on the replay, you're welcome to share your thoughts, comments, questions in the captions. I do check in on these things when I create content for future videos, and we'll probably be back for more live streams next month. Thank you, everyone. I hope that you have a wonderful week.